Frogs. Those cute little squishy balls of jelly with googly eyes sat in the forest, chirping away so innocently like butter wouldn't melt. But in reality, they are actually a massive pain in the They're finicky, fragile, loud-mouthed, and spend their days dreaming up new and imaginative ways of killing themselves. They're generally an awful pet. You should steer clear of them like the plague, and definitely do not buy one. You can go now. Why are you still here? Seriously, we're done. You want to talk about frogs, don't you? Fine. Join me as we go through the good, the bad, and the ugly on the ideal pet frog, the Pacman Frog.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important reminder. South Coast Spiders will be at the Taunton Invert Show this Sunday, 23rd of February. Doors open 11 AM. We hope to see you there. Now, back to your regular scheduled programming.
This rather fat blob is a Pacman frog, otherwise known as a South American horn frog. 10 points to Gryffindor if you can work out where either of those names came from. So, the good. These guys are one of the more rugged and heavily built frogs, outside of maybe the giant African bullfrog. They're generally pretty tough if kept right, and thankfully their care requirements are pretty simple. They'll need a suitable enough enclosure, ideally acrylic or glass. They'll need a water dish to sit in occasionally and hydrate themselves. They'll need a bit of plant cover or something to hide under. And finally, they'll need some substrate that will allow them to burrow and maintain some humidity. Thankfully, that's really about it. Any other decoration you add is purely for your benefit more than theirs. They're more than happy to dig a crater, sit in it for the foreseeable future, and wait for food to pass along. And boy oh boy, do they love their food. If you hadn't already guessed by their name, these guys munch and munch and munch. And what do they eat, I hear you ask? Well, everything. If it moves, it is going in that enormous mouth. And if it doesn't fit in that enormous mouth, that just means it needs to try a bit harder. They'll happily eat locusts, crickets, morio worms, dubia roaches, pinky mice, even other frogs. Basically, it's a seafood diet. If they see food, it's going in their mouth. This substantial appetite does mean they're prone to getting obese, so ration their food carefully. However, it also means they grow to a decent size, so they're definitely going to make a statement piece. Likelihood is your friends have never seen a frog quite like this. Now, obviously they're going to need a 12-hour day and night cycle, and while they don't necessarily need UVB, a low-level UVB bulb is certainly going to be beneficial to them. As is the occasional calcium dusting on their food. They don't generally need any external heat unless your house gets really cold. Keep them between 22 and 24 and they'll be absolutely happy. If you do have to add some external heat, make sure you use an appropriate thermostat, otherwise one day you'll come home to a boiled frog. So, the bad. Now, Pacman frogs don't generally have that many negatives, but that doesn't mean there are none. Like with all frogs, the Pacman frog skin will absorb absolutely everything. Any chemicals, creams, oils on your hands are going to be sucked up like a sponge, and these can be absolutely fatal to any frog. Even just the chemicals in tap water can be really dangerous for them, so you're going to want to stock up on things like spring water or even a reverse osmosis machine if you're feeling flush. All of this just means there are a few extra steps needed before handling something like this. Wash your hands absolutely thoroughly before handling one. Avoid any chemicals or even wear something like nitrile gloves. Better yet, just enjoy these guys from afar. Refrain from giving them regular cuddles and taking them for a walk. Now, I joked about the Pacman frog's appetite, and while it's amusing, when I say they will eat everything, I mean everything, and that includes you. Once your Pacman frog has spotted a medium rare index finger wandering past, it's going to latch on and it's not going to let go. And once that happens, it's going to suck for both of you. These guys have got extremely sharp gnashes, and getting your finger back is definitely going to result in some blood. It's not all sunshine and roses for the frog either. It's very likely to come away with a broken jaw. These guys have a weak spot in the centre of their lower jaw, which can break when trying to eat something too big. This can take a long time to heal and can affect how well they can eat during that healing process. So to avoid this, if you are going to pick one up, scoop it up from behind and try and keep your fingers as far away from the mouth as possible. Now, sticking with food, don't be fooled by the name into thinking this is an active frog that's going to run along its enclosure in a straight line, gobbling up crickets and ghosts. This frog is very likely to be in the exact same spot 3 weeks later, or could be gone completely. They have a habit of brewmating and burrowing away for long periods of time. One of my Pacman frogs disappeared for 12 months. That's 12 months looking at a box of dirt wondering if it's okay. They're not exactly a thrilling pet. And now, the ugly. While not a massive issue, the Pacman frog, like all frogs, require a little bit more care and maintenance on a daily basis, unlike other things like reptiles and inverts. They're going to need regular misting, enough that their skin doesn't dry out, but they're not so much that their enclosure gets all boggy. They're going to need regular feeding, so be prepared to have a wide, diverse range of insects available, alongside all the supplements. Now, none of this is a deal breaker, and if you're considering getting a frog, you've probably factored in all of these things already, but it's something to consider. Now, another problem with frogs is they will spend their days dreaming of those heavenly clouds, coming up with new and imaginative ways of ending their lives early. A common cause of death for the Pacman frog is actually drowning. You've seen the level of movement these guys have, and they can very easily get stuck in their water dishes, so make sure it's shallow or add a little layer of gravel at the bottom, just so they can get out easily. Now, another issue, and this affects all frogs, not just the Pacman frog, and that's inbreeding. Breeders are getting hard to find, and the fresh bloodlines just aren't coming into the country, meaning that any frog you get is probably related to this frog and all the other frogs in existence. And unfortunately, this has had an impact on the quality of frogs that we're seeing in the market now. It affects things like leg and muscle movement, so don't be surprised if you find one with a gammy front leg or something. And sadly, premature, unexpected deaths are becoming more and more common in these frogs, especially in the more desirable fancy colour morphs. So given all that, is the Pacman frog the perfect frog for you? Well, probably, yeah. If you want a big, impressive, inexpensive, food-motivated blob of lard that's pretty easy to care for and doesn't move all that much and comes in a bright range of colours and spends its days dreaming of chomping on fingers and drowning itself, there's probably no better frog. Now, in all seriousness, these guys make great pets. And while the care requirements take a little bit more care and attention, they make an impressive statement and they're a great stepping stone into keeping other frogs down the line. So with all that, there's nothing much left to say except thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Pacman frog, and we will see you real soon in another video. So the good. These guys are one of the more rugged and heavily built frogs outside of maybe the giant African land snail. No,